What up guys, Gozen here for Anime Uproar, back at it again with yet another 7 Deadly Sins video. I usually make videos on stuff that I'm curious about and want to do more research on, and that's exactly what happened with this video. I want to take a closer look at not only how each sin got their sin given to them in the first place, but how that character relates in a broader sense to their sin. Make sure to like and subscribe for more 7 Deadly Sins content. If that's not enough 7 Deadly Sins for you, you can also follow us on Instagram at Anime Uproar, where we have daily 7 Deadly Sins posts and conversations. A quick warning, there will be manga spoilers, and without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's start with our captain, Meliodas, the Dragon Sin of Wrath. It seems ironic at first that such an easygoing and calm character would be the Sin of Wrath, but we eventually find out that there's a whole nother side to Meliodas that shows itself when his loved ones are concerned. Since the 7 Deadly Sins clearly have religious connotations, we'll be looking at specifically religious definitions of each sin. Wrath is defined as uncontrolled feelings of anger, rage, and even hatred. Wrath often reveals itself in a wish to seek vengeance. Meliodas got his sin because of what he did to the kingdom of Danafal. It was a kingdom that used to be just as powerful as Leonis, but Meliodas wiped it off the map when he lost himself in his wrath, after he failed to save Liz, one of his true love's reincarnations, from Fraudrin. And with the definition of wrath, he couldn't control his anger, rage, and hatred. Wrath is said to be associated with vengeance, and we see Meliodas seek out and finally get his revenge against Fraudrin. As Bon notices, when Meliodas is fighting against Fraudrin, it isn't his usual way of fighting. It becomes clear that Fraudrin has changed, and has come to care so much for Griamore, who he has come to view as a son, that he cannot bring himself to risk injuring him. As a result, he gives up and asks Meliodas to kill him. Meliodas, without a moment of hesitation, and with a wicked smile, brutally takes Fraudrin's life with a single punch. Merlin can't help but think that it was an ugly way to take a life, even if it was Fraudrin's. There are other times when we catch glimpses of Meliodas' suppressed wrath, like when Bon tries to take Meliodas' broken sword, and Meliodas gets angry and ends up inflicting a wound on Bon's neck that manages to leave a permanent scar on his immortal body. Then there were times when he entered Berserk mode and Assault mode. Thus, it's no wonder that Meliodas is the Sin of Wrath. He is constantly trying to suppress his wrath, and that only ends up making it all the worse when it does surface. However, now in the manga, he has awakened to his great original power. Rather than being afraid of it and suppressing it like he did in the past, he is using his great power in his normal form, showing us that he is no longer repressing his true power for fear of the damage it might cause. And because he is no longer repressing that powerful and possibly dangerous side of himself, chances are he won't have those sudden outbursts of wrath like he did in the past. In this way, it appears that Meliodas has finally conquered his wrath. Moving on to Bon, the Fox Sin of Greed. He got his sin because he was mistakenly blamed for destroying the fairy forest to satisfy his own selfish greed for immortality. In the side story, Bon is captured by the authorities and they blame him for not only destroying the Fairy King's forest, but also for murdering Elaine, the woman he loves. Obviously, in anime reality, Bon tried to save Elaine and the forest from the Red Demon, so the accusations are completely false. Yet Bon has been greedy at other times. Greed is defined as a strong desire and pursuit of material possessions, hoarding of materials or objects, theft, and robbery, especially by means of violence, trickery, and manipulation of authority, are all actions that may be inspired by greed. Obviously, Bon is associated with stealing because he used to be a bandit. However, mainly, Bon is greedy not when it comes to material objects, but when it comes to the object of his affection, Elaine. Bon is obsessed with stealing Elaine, stealing her from Death's arms, and having her all to himself. In order to do this, he even resorts to violence and tries to kill his best friend Meliodas when he thinks it might help him bring Elaine back to life. Ultimately, he does overcome his greed. He changes his mind about killing Meliodas and decides to find another way that lets him save Elaine from death and Meliodas from the Demon King. He risks his own sanity and possibly never seeing Elaine again when he decides to go to Purgatory and try to save Meliodas. He also learns the new power Gift, which lets him give and not just take power away from others. Ironically, it is only through giving that Bon is able to steal Elaine away from death. He gives his immortality in exchange for her life, and instead of running away with her to live happily ever after, which would be the selfish thing to do, he goes on to risk his no longer immortal life to help Meliodas again. Clearly, Bond has overcome the negative aspects of his greed. Rather than just stealing and hoarding power and immortality, he learns how to give it away in order to help others. Following Bond, we have Merlin, the boar sin of gluttony. Gluttony is defined as the overindulgence and overconsumption of anything. Gluttony can be interpreted as selfishness, essentially placing concern with one's own impulses or interests above the well-being or interests of others. In Merlin's case, it is her interest in knowledge and by extension power that she seems to place above the well-being or interests of others. She likely got her sin because of what happened 3,000 years ago. She wanted gifts from the Supreme Deity and Demon King, who both wanted Merlin, who had the special power of infinity, on their side. The sages of Belialuin were against Merlin meeting with either god, but she went against their wishes and negotiated with each god on her own. She tricked them. By pretending that she would join each, she got the Demon King to give her detailed information on all the secret arts and mysteries of the underworld and divine protection that could defend against the brainwashing of goddesses. Then, she got the Supreme Deity to give her divine protection able to nullify any and all manner of dark curses and commandments. She then escaped without joining either side, and as a result, the two enraged gods rained curses and mists of death, fire, and lightning over the city of Belialuin for 1,000 days, destroying the metropolis. If this story is in fact true, it seems clear that all of the sages of Belialuin had to suffer, possibly even die, because of Merlin's selfish desire for knowledge and power. This trait can also be witnessed in the way she treats living creatures as guinea pigs for her experiments. However, it is clear that Merlin too has come a long way in the last 3,000 years. I believe that her care for Arthur and the 7 deadly sins now outweighs her intellectual curiosity, to the point where she wanted to stop Meliodas coming out of the cocoon of darkness, even though she must have been curious about what would happen if Meliodas successfully absorbed all 10 commandments. She still loves knowledge and experiments, but now it seems that she would prioritize the well-being of her friends. Next, we'll look at the Fairy King Harlequin, the grisly sin of sloth. Sloth can be defined as the absence of interest or habitual disinclination to exertion. It means to not carry out one's duties and obligations. You can see a kind of laziness in King's everyday behavior. He likes to levitate, his secret treasure usually takes the form of a pillow, and when he does fight, unlike others, he usually stays in place while moving around his sacred treasure, which does the fighting for him. However, his sin is more directly tied with his failure to properly carry out his duties and obligations as Fairy King. He got his sin because he let Helbram, another fairy, go on murdering humans for 500 years. He had lost his memories, so he wasn't aware of what was happening. Nevertheless, the authorities concluded that, and I quote, "It was the sloth of the Fairy King who went unaware of this tragedy and let it go on for so long," end quote. And as a result, he was sentenced to 1,000 years in prison. King also left Elaine, his little sister, to protect the fairy forest in his place, when he initially left to save Helbram and the other fairies from corrupt fairy hunting humans. Because he left the fairy forest for so long, when the Red Demon attacked, he destroyed the forest and killed his sister. The Red Demon might have done even more damage if Bond wasn't around to replant the forest elsewhere. So Harlequin's sin was that he failed to live up to a king's duties, namely that he failed to protect those who relied on him like his sister. Although he really should spend more time in the actual Fairy King's forest, since he's the Fairy King and all, he has, in his own way, overcome the sin of sloth. He has decided to protect everyone, including the fairy folk and Diane, and with his new power that came with his full-grown wings, he will most likely be strong enough to do both in the future. He will no longer shirk his responsibilities, and that is why the fairy folk eventually re-accept him as the Fairy King after having Bond temporarily serve in that role. Then we have Diane, the serpent sin of envy. Envy can be defined as a sad or resentful covetousness towards the traits or possessions of someone else. Diane's backstory reveals that she used to be alone most of the time as a kid, and as a result felt very lonely. When she hears about humans and how they have marriages, where they bond with another human to live their lives with, she says that makes her jealous. She is sad that other people have friends and lovers, while she was all alone for so long. This is why she hates the idea of Harlequin leaving her, and begs him not to leave her by herself when she's sick. She wants him to stay with her always. However, Harlequin erases her memories of him, so she forgets about this until later. Fast forward and she becomes jealous of Elizabeth because of how much Meliodas loves her. She wishes he felt that way about her and not Elizabeth. In this sense, she wants to possess what Elizabeth possesses, Meliodas and his love. However, she overcomes the sin of jealousy when she gets her memories back and remembers that she loves Harlequin. Once she is reunited with him, she no longer feels envy towards others who have companionship and love because she now has that too with King. Next, let's talk about Gowther, the goat's sin of lust. Lust can be described as an intense longing. It is usually thought of as intense or unbridled sexual desire, but lust could also mean simply desire in general, thus lust for money, power, and other things. In a side story, we see how Gowther got his sin. The authorities believe he seduced the princess Nadia Leonis with his lust, and not only deflowered her, but murdered her in the most brutal manner. Obviously, the authorities in the world of the Seven Deadly Sins got it wrong yet again. Nadia and Gowther loved each other, and Nadia was smiling right up to the end because she loved Gowther and her dream was to spend the last days of her life with him. In chapter 112 of the manga, Gowther reveals what he is truly lustful for, a heart that understands emotions. Just as with other forms of lust, he hurts others like Gilla and her brother in the pursuit of his desire. Gowther constantly seemed to be unable to understand how other people were feeling. However, it is clear that Gowther has overcome this inability. While he used to be clueless, in chapter 303, when Meliodas and Elizabeth are finally reunited, he is the one who tells King to be quiet so that they don't break the mood. He is empathizing with how Meliodas and Elizabeth must feel. In other words, he is reading the atmosphere successfully, something he always had trouble doing in the past. He's definitely come a long way. Lastly, we have Lord Escanor, the lion's sin of pride. This is perhaps the most obvious example of a character embodying his sin. Escanor, in his daytime form, is extremely prideful. When we first see his daytime self in the manga, he boasts that he stands at the peak of all the races. To this, Galland responds that he's a mass of pride and arrogance. A few pages later, Melascula calls him arrogant too, so his pride is made blatantly clear from the beginning. But let's step back for a second and examine the definition of pride. Pride is considered on almost every list the original and most serious of the Seven Deadly Sins. It is identified as dangerously corrupt selfishness, the putting of one's own desires, urges, wants, and whims before the welfare of other people. In even more destructive cases, it is irrationally believing that one is essentially and necessarily better, superior, or more important than others, failing to acknowledge the accomplishments of others, and excessive admiration of the personal image or self, especially forgetting one's own lack of divinity and refusing to acknowledge one's own limits, faults, or wrongs as a human being. We definitely see these qualities in Escanor. He speaks as if he believes he is divine or godly. Even his axe is called the Divine Axe Rita. He feels okay about ordering others around like Bon and insists that no one gets to decide things besides him, and maybe Merlin. He even looks forward to beating Meliodas in assault mode so he can prove that he is the strongest Sin. And when he beats him, he asks him how does it feel to be looked down upon by a human. Afterwards, he is too proud to let the others know that he's taken way too much damage during the fight and keeps up the facade that he's fine until Merlin knocks him down with a single punch. As Merlin lets us know, Escanor in fact suffered much greater damage than the captain because he used far too much of his overpowered ability Sunshine, and doing so is very hard on his human body. However, Escanor too overcomes his sin eventually. Escanor finally reaches his limit against the original demon, who makes him blast off like Team Rocket with one powerful blow. We see that the Divine Axe Rita is breaking apart, symbolically suggesting that Escanor's illusion of divinity is breaking down too. He can no longer as a human pretend to be a god, or that he is above all other races and beings. Escanor realizes that he doesn't have enough life to handle the burden of Sunshine. We see Escanor shed a tear and beg for Mael to take the power back and save his friends. Thus, he overcomes the sin of pride by prioritizing his friends above himself and by finally acknowledging his own limits as a human being. He gives the source of his great power, Sunshine, to a goddess/archangel/heavenly being who can wield it more effectively. And that, in my view, was a beautiful way for Escanor to overcome the most serious of the Seven Deadly Sins. And that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to smash that like button to let me know. If you haven't, make sure to subscribe for more 7 Deadly Sins content and check out our 7 Deadly Sins playlist, which is almost at 50 videos. For more 7 Deadly Sins content, follow us on Instagram at AnimeUproar for daily posts and conversations. Thank you to our patrons, especially to our pro tier patrons, Keelon and the one and only Gilgamesh, and to our the 1 tier patrons who definitely deserve to be proud, MattyMac239 and Ace17FFDP. Thank you all so much for your support. If you get value from these kinds of videos, please consider supporting more content like this by going to our Patreon and pledging as little as $1 a month. And you'll even get benefits like access to our private Discord, and your name will be featured in future videos along with these amazing people right here. You can find our Patreon linked in the description. Lastly, check out our anime-inspired merch, including shirts like Escanor Praise the Sun and Meliodas Feel the Wrath. You can find them at animeuproar.com. Thanks again, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys.